Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Thank goodness we can put the politicians aside for a while. You're going to have to wait till they get down to South Carolina, and maybe they'll just keep going and go beyond the Florida Keys, and we won't hear any more of them. Anyway, personalities. We do have a great personality this morning with some perspectives. Scott Lynn Betzelberger. I just called him, referred to him a few minutes ago, the former mayor of Burtonview, and we're going to bring Scott on in just a minute. Scott, we always try to start Viewpoint with a kudo or two in the community. We've got some young basketball players here. You might know something about that game. Some young basketball players here who are doing very well in tournaments, and we certainly want to salute them. And for instance, of the speech team. You know, a lot of folks can't participate in athletics, Scott, so they do other things in school, and I can't think of a better extracurricular activity than getting self-involved in the speech departments. And we've got some folks who are moving on to special parts of the tournament, so congratulations to them. Now we're going to make a formal introduction. Oh, by the way, I might add that our co-host this morning is Mr. James Ash, who's kind of a busy fellow here in this studio. He works with the cameras, he works with the control board, he gives me signals, so we're going to bring him back here just as soon as he gets a chance. But right now, Scott Lynn Betzelberger, noted author and publisher of 2 books, Lincoln Boy, Logan County Boy. We're glad to have you with us, Scott. We're going to talk about sports heroes here in a few minutes. Good morning, sir. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Bill. I'm doing great. Thanks. Nice to be with you this morning.
Well, it's a joy for us to have a chance to visit with you. First, we'd like to kind of go back to your original work on the hardwood court. I asked you who your teammates were, and for goodness sakes, I find out it was 1972. My goodness gracious.
Time does fly, doesn't it?
Oh, my. Makes me feel a lot older than my 92, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And
well,
you had teammates.
I was there playing for Duncan Reed for a couple years. Actually, as a sophomore, I dressed and sat on the bench in some of those games when Seymour Reed and Pat Kirk and Jerry Clockengay, Mark Humbert, Bill Hoagland, when that team went 30-0 before losing to Peoria Spalding. I was on the bench in some of the home games, not the away games, and certainly not the state tournament games. But I got indoctrinated right away into the rail splitter spirit. And certainly junior year, John Andrews, who I know is still around town there.
He sure is.
John was the captain of the team my junior year, and then I was the captain their senior year. The starters, the old-timers there will remember, of course, Mike Schneider, Mike Swingle, Tim Bushell, and, of course, the great Norman Cook, as well as myself. We had a great team. We didn't lose a game on the road all season, but we did lose 3 at home, including the regional final to Springfield Southeast, a game we led by 9 going to the 4th quarter. So I still remember all those facts this many years later. That's how much it affected me.
Yeah, he clued into the minutia, all right. There's no question about that. I don't know whether you've had a chance to be in touch with your teammate Tim Bushell at all. Tim has done remarkably well. We're very proud of him. The Bushell family and us are quite close, and it gives me a great deal of joy and pleasure to see those 2 young men, Tim and his brother Brad.
Sure. I've actually been in touch with Brad more recently. Tim, I have talked with along through the years, but we're not as in touch as certainly I'd like to be. I was out in Portland, Oregon, which is, the far hinterland. Not many people get out there very often. And now I live in the Tampa Bay area, the opposite coast. So hopefully we'll get to see some of my former teammates from time to time. And I will be making a trip, I'm sure, back to Logan County, Lincoln, and see family. I still have relatives in New Holland. Lincoln, my brother and my sister, older sister, both own homes in Lincoln. So yeah, I still stay in touch via Facebook with John Andrews and Brad Bushell. We've been in touch many times. So Facebook's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it is. If it's used right, there's a lot of stupidity out there, but you just have to go through that. There's no question about that at all. Yes, I certainly remember that you have relatives over there in Sheridan Township. By the way, the Hawes family, Helen Hawes Betzelberger, I want to tell you, I noted in my visits back and forth with you that you mentioned that you were east of Burtonview. I'm going to have to bring you back and box the compass with you, young fella.
Yeah? am I not east of Burton View? I was east of Route 10. I know that. Wasn't I?
You're north of Route 10.
Oh, hell, I can't remember anymore. See, I remember all that stuff about basketball, but I don't remember my directions
very well. You can find the basket very easily, but you can't find your way.
Oh, you know what? You're right. The sunset in the west. Oh, yeah. Okay, I get that.
Burton View.
You're right.
Burton View has only one street, of course. That's the main street. We're going to call that Betzelberger Way. Jim, I go back with the Betzelbergers a long way. When I was a kid on the farm out there, right across the road, so I knew Hemi and Mrs. Betzelberger very well, his grandparents. Now, let's get serious here about your career, young fella. Take us to, I want to tell you, Jim, he started his career with Warpsy.
We both have something in common there, Scott. We both started at WPRC.
Yes, and that was a long time ago, as a matter of fact, in my case.
But I don't think Jim called play-by-play pig scramble.
No. Yeah, that was my first play-by-play, and I remember, it was a rainy night in Lincoln, and the county fair and the pig scramble, and it was rainy, and of course with the grease everywhere, the kids all had numbers so that I could identify them. Of course, within about 5 seconds of the scramble starting, you couldn't see any numbers, so every one of those kids was a youngster. And I said, that youngster's got one, and this youngster's got one. And to this day, my wife hates to hear me say the word youngster. She just, she can't believe it.
Well, you were covering yourself. That's good enough. Let's go from your high school to your college days, Ron. I mean, Scott, that's your daddy. Or brother, I mean.
Brother, older brother. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You went down to SIU, and then from there, take us on your career.
I was on a scholarship of SIU Carbondale, and I went down there and was on a team with Josie Merriweather, and he of course played many years in the NBA. Nate Hawthorne was a senior when I went down there as a freshman. He played for the Lakers. And then Mike Glenn, my sophomore year, Mike Glenn came in, and we both played the same position, and Mike Glenn, later known as Stinger on TNT, he started as a freshman. We were both shooting guards, and I realized I was never going to get to play. So he was way too good. I transferred to SIU Edwardsville, which was Division II at that time, just outside of St. Louis, and played basketball there. But more importantly, I met my wife there and didn't care much about basketball after that.
Well, that transcended school.
Yep. So anyway, bottom line was I didn't have much of a college career. Once I got to college, I realized I was just a really good high school player.
Yeah, that you were.
And that's when you met Jay Randolph, wasn't it?
Yeah, I interned with Jay Randolph my senior year, and my last quarter of the summer of '76, and got a chance to go to all the Cardinal games. And Jay, of course, was the TV play-by-play man for the Cardinals at that time, and became a mentor of mine through the years. We've stayed in touch. I just talked to Jay not too long ago. Just within the last 3 or 4 weeks, sent him a copy of my new book, Sports Idols. And, in the back of the book, I acknowledged him as, a real mentor, somebody who meant a lot to me, got me started in this world of journalism.
Well, your first book, Thornridge, why was Dalton Thornridge so fascinated by you over back in the early 70s? They were the big team coming out of the state of Illinois. Quinn Buckner, of course, went to Indiana, and you were hoping to play them in the tournament. Never got there, though, did you?
No, we didn't. The fascination was they were the best team in the state when I was playing. In 1970-71 season, my junior year, they won the last of the single class tournaments where there was just one class. Everybody in the state was in the tournament. Everybody went up through the districts and the regionals and this, sectional and super sectional just to get to Champaign. They won. They went 30-1, losing only one game during the Christmas tournament to Mounds Meridian the junior year. So then they come back the next year, and it was a senior-laden team with Quinn Buckner, as you mentioned, Boyd Batts, Mike Bonzik, Ernie Dunn, and Greg Rose. That was a starting five for that team, and everybody gave them their best shot. And they were the great team, the best high school team I've ever seen, as I went to the state championship game that year and watched them just destroy Quincy. But the bottom line was it was the best team I'd ever seen. And they won without anybody getting close. Nobody got closer than 14 points all season. Only 4 teams got within 20 that senior year, my senior year. And that was the thing. We were the second-ranked team in the state. Lincoln was that year for much of the season, as we were having that season where we went 24-3 and started out 17-0. We were kind of hoping to get a chance to play them because we knew they were the defending state champs, but we got knocked off in our own regional, so no, we didn't get the chance.
Yeah, Southeast did you in. I'm sure. Did you play them earlier in the year?
No, we had not. Now, Springfield High, the Senators, were in our conference, the Big 12 at the time, but we didn't know much about Springfield Southeast. It turned out they got knocked off before in the first game of the sectional tournament, and it was really disappointing because I think with our size, with Tim Bushell and myself, I was actually playing guard that year, and that was a 6'5", 6'6" guard was kind of unheard of, but I was playing guard along with Mike Snyder, and we were tough. I mean, and with Norm Cook, an all-stater. Tim Bushell, great rebounder, could score a little bit too. Swingle, one of the greatest shooters in Lincoln history, and Schneider was such a tough guard. We were pretty good, and I kick myself to this day that we let that one game get away. In the book Thornridge, the Quincy guys, I interviewed all of them about playing Thornridge in the state championship game in 1972, and they all said we were terrified. We didn't expect to get past Lincoln in the sectional. Wow. So when you guys got knocked off by Southeast, we were just totally excited. And then when Southeast, which was a pretty good team as it turned out, got knocked off the next game before Quincy could play them, Quincy, I know one of their players, Bob Spear, told me, he said, we started to believe that maybe the stars were aligning. Maybe we're going to end up getting to the state championship game. So it was really a great time, a fun thing for me to go back and talk to all those Thornridge players, the Quincy players, all the legendary high school coaches, because I wanted to find out if they still thought that Thornridge was the best team of all time. Lee Kabuti, obviously Duncan Reed, and on and on. So it was great fun to do all that. And it made for a terrific book. I didn't realize at the time, because it was a Chicago team, and this was before the internet, and we all knew everything about everybody, that Thornridge was it was an all-white school, but they had just opened the doors to African-American students. So Quinn Buckner, in fact, was his class was the second group that had African-American kids coming through the doors at Thornridge High. So it was there was an element of black and white. That's why the subtitle of the book, it's Thornridge, and then The Perfect Season in Black and White was the subtitle, which is kind of had a double meaning there.
Oh, I thought it was pretty subtle and pretty direct at that too, Scott. The fact that you got into broadcast journalism, did that enter into your mind as you were a young man at college?
Well, even before that, out on the farm in Burtonview, which was what, north of
you got that right.
North of Burton. Okay.
I'll get you straightened out.
I would be by myself out there so often, kid on the farm, and I would play wiffle ball by myself and throw the wiffle ball up in the air and hit it and do play-by-play, imitating my favorite announcers, Harry Carey and Jack Buck, who were the Cardinal announcers at that time. And so I all my life wanted to be a sports guy doing play-by-play of games. And my mom, my sister told me the story later after my mom had passed a few years ago. She said, Mom used to look out the kitchen window and look at you talking to yourself outside, playing wiffle ball by yourself, and say, what is that kid ever going to do for a living? Luckily, I was, I guess, good enough that I got a chance to do what I'd always dreamed of.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Earlier in your career, you got a job at WAND TV 17 Decatur. That's when you were going by Scott Betzelberger with sports.
Yes.
Were you alongside Lauren Boatman? Was he the weather guy back then?
Lauren Boatman was the weather guy. Jerry Slabe was there for a time. You remember the anchorman who went over to Champaign?
Channel 3.
But yeah, Lauren Boatman was the weather guy. When I went over there, I was the weekend sports guy. Dick Westbrook was the news director.
Oh, yeah.
And I will tell you a quick story. When I interviewed for the job, he said, "Okay, you've got the job. Now let's talk about your name." and I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, a lot of times in broadcasting, and this was my first job, obviously." He says, "A lot of times in broadcasting, people will use an air name, something so that people, can't look you up in the phone book and call if they didn't like your story or something like that." And he says, "Now, I'm not telling you have to, but you can change your name if you want to and use an air name. And I said, well, are you telling me you want me to use a different name? And he said, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you can if you want to. But I kind of read between the lines and thought, I think he wants me to change my name. So I actually did, after beginning there, getting the job as Scott Betzelberger, I became Scott Lynn in a hurry.
And it worked out. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, just to say, you weren't there that long because then is that when you went to Oregon or?
No, I went down. In fact, I got a job in Tampa, St. Pete after just a year and a half. Tampa, St. Petersburg. I jumped into the 17th largest market at the time. It's even bigger now. Covering pro sports, covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Rowdies, which was in the North American Soccer League. And just the thing that happened was, and boy, this is going back a ways, it was in April of 1978, there was a huge winter storm that brought down the TV tower at WAND TV.
That was in
we were
March.
knocked off the air. And basically, to keep earning a paycheck, we were just told we were going to have to wash the station vehicles, kind of hang out, and just do whatever until we could get some sort of temporary transmitter, because the tower actually came down and crashed into the control room and destroyed a lot of the technical stuff. So the bottom line was, I had set up an interview. I was coming down to spring training to cover the Cardinals in St. Petersburg, and I had talked to somebody down here about where's the closest hotel to the complex, and I had talked to the sports director of the ABC station, Dick Crippen, several times through this process. And so I then called him to say, hey, look, we're not going to be on the air for at least a month, so they've canceled my spring training trip. And he goes, well, hey, just between you and me, we've gotten along really well on the phone. Would you be interested in coming here as my weekend sports guy? And I'm thinking, I looked outside, there's about an inch of ice on every tree, that thick. And I'm thinking, I look at it's 82 degrees in St. Petersburg that day, and I'm thinking, yeah, I probably am interested in that.
I think so, in a hurry.
And it's funny, that's where you are now.
Yeah, I was here 2.5 years, and then went out to Portland, Oregon, and I was there for more than 24 years, in TV first, exclusively for about 9 years, and then switched over to radio, but then called TV play-by-play for Fox Sports Northwest for a number of years. Later, I joined Comcast Sportsnet Northwest, called all kinds of things. I was the top college basketball guy for Fox Sports Northwest for 2 or 3 seasons back in the early 2000s. I called Gonzaga, Washington, Oregon State, the West Coast Conference package with the University of Portland. So it was a great time. That was when I pretty much realized the dream. I was still working full-time for a radio station in Portland, the home of the Trailblazers and the home of Oregon State University's football and basketball. But I also got to go out on my own calling the play-by-play, using up all my vacation days.
Well, folks might have just tuned in here late and not realized we're talking to one of our real great sports heroes here in Logan County. Boy just lived just north of Burtonview on a farm there. And Scott, we're going to take a quick station break. I think you might know something about commercials and so forth. And
I was wondering when we were going to get to one of those.
Yeah, we'll be right back with Scott Lynn very shortly. Go ahead. And we're right back live in the studios here of WLCN. Almost said WPRC, James. Our guest this morning, Scott Lynn Betzelberger, a gentleman who has left the Logan County and embarked upon a great and a very interesting and obviously a very successful career. We're proud of you, Scott. We want to talk about the literary side of your career. We could kind of understand maybe how you came up with a theory or the idea for Thorn Ridge. That was right in your backyard and all. It was very interesting part of the sports history in high school basketball here in Illinois. You came up with a very unusual idea with your second book, and we all hope it's very successful, Scott. I understand it's doing well. The book is entitled Sports Idols. I thought that was a unique concept. How did you happen to dream that up, Mr. Lynn?
Well, I'll tell you, it was kind of the thing where I knew that I was going to lose my job at some point. Radio was changing. I was the sports director of this station, and everybody was going to the internet, and I thought, man, you know what? I'm never going to be able to get to retirement. And everybody asked me after I wrote Thorn Ridge, what's your next book going to be? And I thought, it would be fun to work on another book after I get let go, which I was 100% sure that was going to happen. And it did happen in August of 2013. So basically in 2010, when I was publicizing Thornridge and people were asking me that question, I thought, well, what could I work on right now that I would not have to write immediately, but that I could work on once I got more free time, if you will. And I started thinking, well, I've got access to all these athletes right now because as a sports guy, the NBA teams were coming into Portland to play, and I was going to celebrity golf tournaments and charity auctions and things like that. So I had access to a lot of athletes, and I thought, what would hold up over time? And I started thinking, one thing that everybody seems to always be interested in when you're watching a game on TV is like who their favorite player is or who was their childhood hero. So I started thinking, well, I could ask these athletes, who was your very first childhood idol, your very first boyhood hero, if you will? And I started thinking that would hold up over time, and I wouldn't have to write the book right away. So in 2010, I started stockpiling, doing interviews with these athletes and talking with them about their very first idols. Did you ever meet them? What was it like? Did they live up to your expectations, or did they disappoint you? You're an idol for so many kids yourself as an athlete. Did you ever think about that? Is there a sense of responsibility? And then when time permitted, I also talked about their personal lives or their careers, with their highlights, their best moments, their best memories of their careers. So the theme of the book is the first heroes of our heroes. That's the subtitle. But Sports Idols is more of a storytelling book in their own words than really just a listing of who their childhood idols were. And I think that the stories that they tell are amazing. Ozzie Smith, I mean, in Central Illinois, you're either a Cardinal or a Cub fan for the most part. So Ozzie Smith was one of the guys I talked to, and he talked about his childhood idol being Roberto Clemente, and he later won the Roberto Clemente Award, which meant the world to him. But one thing that Ozzie shared with me was he kept a secret his whole career. He said from 1985 to 96, he played with a torn rotator cuff in his throwing arm. And he said he never told anyone. Nobody knew it. He had to compensate for that the lack of strength in his throwing arm by better positioning of where he played in the field. But he said no one ever knew that, and he said that was one of his biggest thrills, was being able to get through 11 years of his major league career without anyone knowing that he had a torn rotator cuff and had no strength left in his arm.
Wasn't Ozzie the one that could do the backflip on the infield?
Absolutely, and he talks about the last time he ever did a backflip in the book. So it's pretty cool. Obviously, I talked to Quinn Buckner, as you mentioned, one of the Illinois legends in basketball. But there are so many others, and again, I used some personal connections as well. Hersey Hawkins, who was the big Bradley University star a while back, he was working with the Trailblazers, so I asked Hersey about his idol. Doug Collins, the broadcaster who was the Benton, Illinois high school star and obviously started Illinois State, he talked about Pete Maravich being his idol and said, hey, I had long hair because of Pete, but I also wore his floppy socks. Do you remember? That was one of Maravich's trademarks.
Pistol Pete,
Yeah, Pistol Pete, absolutely. Walt Frazier, Southern Illinois star, Clyde, he talked with me about his idols, and Mike Glenn, who told me a great story. I thought, Mike Glenn, again, I mentioned him earlier, he's the guy who took my job at SIU Carbondale, the job I wanted anyway. He said his first idol was Mildred Nelson, who was a young, deaf black girl who played at the Georgia School for the Deaf for Mike Glenn's father. He was the coach of that team, and he said she had the prettiest jump shot he'd ever seen as a little kid, and he patterned his jump shot after her. So I guess I should blame Mildred Nelson for developing Mike Glenn into a great jump shooter. But I thought that was fascinating that his first idol was that. But I talked to a lot of my childhood heroes for this book, too. Dick Grote, who was the Cardinal shortstop for the 64 world champions. Bill White, who was the first baseman on that Cardinal team. Jack Sikma, who was Illinois Wesleyan star. His idol was Ernie Banks. So, and he talked about that. But Joe Torre, Jerry West, Rick Barry, Bill Walton, Ken Griffey Jr., Steph Curry, Dirk Nowitzki. I mean, you just go... It's a who's who, kind of an oral history of our sports history. And it's not just men. I think I've mentioned only men. I should mention Nancy Lopez and Annika Sorenstam. Alex Morgan, the soccer player on the U.S. world team, the U.S. Olympic team. Paula Creamer and Stacy Lewis. There's something for everybody in the book, and I think that you'll be fascinated by some of the stories that they share.
Well, it's a great read. I really enjoyed it. You came up with names in the sports world that this old geezer had lost track of, or maybe didn't know about them in the beginning. Many of them. You had about 146 people that you contacted.
Yeah.
That had to be a laborious process, Scott, and it went on over a long period of time to contact all of these folks. Did you find, for the most part, that they were very amenable to giving you an interview, sir?
Yeah. Here's the thing. When you go into a professional locker room, or if you go into up to a professional athlete, and you say, "Hey, I'm Scott Lynn. I'm doing," you start to say, "I'm a broadcaster," or "I'm a journalist," or whatever. They immediately try to put a wall between you. They're so tired of answering the same questions about the game, or how they're feeling, and their injury. They don't want to talk to you about anything. And if the worst words a pro athlete can hear is, "Hey, do you have a minute?"
Yeah.
So I would go up and say, "Hey, I'm Scott Lynn, and I'm working on a book project about the childhood idols of our sports heroes." And so I've talked to Jerry West. I've talked to Rick Barry. I've talked to Yogi Berra. I've talked to Carl Erskine. Whatever sport they played. I said, they've all shared their childhood idols with me and told me stories. I'd love to be able to include you. Are you interested? And in almost every case, their eyes would kind of light up, and they would smile and go, "Yeah, you know what? Nobody's really ever talked to me about that." So their whole demeanor would change. They were anxious to talk about their childhood. You could almost see them escape and be back to the time when they were an 8-year-old kid dreaming of becoming a pro athlete.
Well, there's an old saying about sell the sizzle rather than the steak. And
that's right.
And that's what you were doing with these ladies and gentlemen in the sports world. You were selling the sizzle of talking about the people that they enjoyed.
Well, and I think, Bill, the thing is that everybody did this. I mean, not everyone, not 100%, but most of us did throw the wiffle ball up in the yard and pretend to be somebody, or we shot baskets in our driveway or at the playground. We all had somebody that we looked up to when we were a kid, and so that was the whole idea. Going back and finding who that was. That I remember pretending to be Stan Musial or Lou Brock or Bob Gibson when I was playing my mind games with myself, or when we were even in high school. I remember I pretended to be Nick Weatherspoon, who was a star at the University of Illinois at that time, and Norm Cook. I remember he would shoot what would be 3-pointers now, and he was pretending to be Austin Carr, who was a big star at Notre Dame at that time. We all pretended to be somebody, and I think that's why these guys' eyes lit up, or these athletes' eyes lit up, because they were remembering the time where they were doing the same thing that so many of us did.
I enjoyed your opening bit about 6 seconds, 6 stitches of an interesting way. You want to elucidate upon that for our audience just a second, Scott?
Sure. The first chapter is 6 seconds, 6 stitches. It is a story told to me by Phil Esposito, who was talking to me about his childhood idol, Gordie Howe. And he said that his second shift on the ice as an NHL player, he was told to go out and guard Gordie Howe, who was the opponent that day. And he said Bobby Hull said to him, there was about to be a face-off, and Bobby Hull says to him, "Have you got that old SOB?" to clean it up a little. And at that point, Esposito says, "Yeah, I got him." And Gordie Howe looked over and smiled and says, "Oh, you got me, huh?" And so the puck is dropped, and as that happens, Gordie Howe swings an elbow and cuts Phil Esposito right around the nose area, and opens up something that needs 6 stitches. Well, they end up fighting and end up in the penalty box together. And so here it is. The guy's been on the ice for 6 seconds, and his boyhood idol has popped him in the nose. And so that he says, "And you used to be my idol," while sitting in the penalty box. But basically,
a really interesting opening into your book.
Yeah,
the book. I just found that the idea, the concept of the book was very entertaining and very elucidating in so many instances. Even an old geezer like me remembered a lot of those names way back. One of my favorite golfers, Nancy Lopez. You had a great interview with her. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, Nancy Lopez and Annika Sorenstam both discussed how, along with their idols, again, we talked about other things too, they talked about how difficult it was to be on top, how lonely it could be, because everybody is jealous of you. Everybody is shooting for you. They're trying to knock you off the perch. And that was a lonely time, frankly, for Nancy Lopez. That first 2 years, she won, I think it was 17 tournaments. I can't remember exactly right now, but I think it was 17 tournaments her first 2 years. And she said she never had a chance to socialize with any of the other players because she would go right from the golf course to the media room because everybody always wanted to talk to Nancy because more often than not, she was leading the tournament or had a great round. And then she would go right from there out to work, at the putting green or go out and work on her iron shots or whatever. And then by the time she finally got back to the clubhouse, all the other players were gone. So she said it was a lonely time for her, successful as she was. And Annika Sorenstam said, yeah, I understand why Nancy says that. I felt that myself as the #1 player in the world for so many years. You are the target. The target's on your back, and nobody really wants to hang out with you. They're trying to knock you off. You're competition.
Yeah. Joe and Josephine Smith, as they walked down the fairway in the galley, wouldn't begin to think of those little side issues that those folks encounter day by day as they go about their professions.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. And that's what this book really shows is the human side of all these people. I mean, it's 146 stories, and it's from everybody from 22-year-old Michael Conforto, the guy that hit 2 home runs in that one World Series games for the Mets this past fall, all the way up to 97-year-old Bobby Doerr, the oldest living Hall of Famer of all time. And it's stories that you won't know if you didn't know much about him. I mean, you think about Carl Erskine, the Brooklyn Dodger great, pitched in all those World Series, had great success. But late in his career, he and his wife had a baby that had Down syndrome. Jimmy, back at that time, kids who had Down syndrome were often shipped off to some institution away from the family. Let somebody else raise this problem child. Well, Carl Erskine's wife says, no, Jimmy goes home with us. And they've raised him. He still lives with them. And I think he's in his 50s now. And Jimmy has had a great life. He has a job. And he's changed attitudes, frankly. Everybody in the community of Anderson, Indiana, where Carl Erskine grew up and where he went back to live, everybody knows Jimmy probably as well as they know Carl himself.
That's a neat story in and of itself. Now, Scott, as you begin to think of the concept for this book, did you sit down and compile a list of folks, or you make yourself notes as you went about your daily business to write their names down so that to go in the master file?
Yeah, I did have some of those, and I was disappointed that some of my idols did not respond to my requests. Again, I grew up a huge Cardinal fan, and as I wrote about in the preface, and you read, Bill, I waited too long to talk to my very first idol, Stan Musial. He had, he was losing his faculties by the time I really got serious about writing the book. I have talked to him throughout the years, but I'd never asked him about his boyhood idol. So I waited too long there. But I did have a list of people, and obviously being a sports talk show host, I had cell phone numbers and home numbers for a lot of these athletes. I interviewed over 200 for the book originally, and in my original manuscript, I had 175 listed, and another page that listed 30 or 35 athletes with their idols, but didn't have any great detail. I just listed who they were. I found out after I submitted my manuscript, you guys, that you have to have written consent if you're going to quote these athletes in a book.
Yeah, I noted that. Is that legal?
It is legal, but you have to have written consent, and I did not. I didn't know that. As a broadcaster, I've always walked up to them with a microphone and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Sure. Would you agree to be interviewed? And they say yes, and if they do the interview, it's verbal consent. But in publishing, you'd had to have written consent. So in August, after my book had been submitted to the publisher, I had to go back and try to get everybody. And I had 175 in the book. 175 athletes that I needed to try to get consent from. I got back and got 146 of them. I gave myself 4 to 6 weeks. I gave myself 4 weeks. It ended up being 6. But I had to go back and try to get them through their agents, through their websites, representatives, different media could help. I was trying desperately to get back to everyone. There were some people I knew right away I was never going to get. I talked to Penny Hardaway at a celebrity golf tournament, and I even tried to go through Nike, and they weren't willing to help in that situation. I mean, they have so many people that are writing books that there are people that in their teams, if you will, representatives, that their job is to keep people like me, a book writer, an author, away from them. Don't bother my guy. He's busy. So it was very difficult, but I did manage to get 146, and I thought, all things considered, that was good. I've got, I didn't count, but 50 or 60 Hall of Famers in the book. There's another 50 or 60 that are just stars that from the top of their game. I mean, I mentioned Austin Carr earlier, Carl Erskine. These guys are not Hall of Famers, and yet they were great athletes at their time. I was a big auto racing fan, and again, I talked about some of the other people from Illinois, but there were people who visited Illinois. I mean, you think about Mario Andretti and A.J. Foyt, Al Unser, Bobby Unser, all those guys raced at Springfield at the state fairgrounds in the early 60s. So these were some of my heroes, too, and I've gotten to talk to Mario many times through the years, and he's just the nicest guy ever. So it was a thrill for me, in many cases, to talk to some of these people. And to answer your question, yes, I did have a list, and when I got laid off in 2013, August of 2013, my wife and I moved back to the Tampa, St. Petersburg area, and I thought I'll finish up the guys on my list. I'll call everybody. I'll finish up the interviews, and then I'll write the book. And that's kind of what I've done over the last year and a half.
Hey, Scott, somebody wants to get a copy of the book, Sports Idols. How do they go about doing that?
Well, it is on Amazon. If anybody wants an autographed or something that's inscribed to them individually, I would just ask them to email me. I've got copies of the book. Okay. Email me at sportsidols@gmail.com. Now, the book has an apostrophe after the first idols, Sports Idols, but there's no apostrophe in the Gmail. It's just sportsidols@gmail.com.
Well, the next time you get back into Lincoln, Illinois, we'll have to have another book signing.
And I'm planning that. I will do that. It might be this summer because I want to get out of this Florida heat. It's so hot and muggy and buggy. I want to get out of here, get back to Central Illinois where it's nice and cool. Right?
I'll give you a place to stay. His fellow's name is Ron. I bet they'd be happy to open up another bedroom for you.
A nice B&B there, maybe.
Yeah, right. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was just going to say, he probably has a lot of friends, relatives, and people out there listening right now. If they want to call in, we got a few minutes left. 648-5510. If you have a question or comment, Scott Lynn Betzelberger with us this morning. 1972 was the year you graduated?
It was, and that was going back to that, and you wondered why Thornridge happened. I thought for years I was trying to find video of that game, and I knew it existed because I remember when I was working in Decatur in the late 70s, or mid to late 70s, that WGN actually replayed the game. So I talked with WGN trying to get a copy of that game, and they said, no, it was on a 2-inch reel-to-reel tape, and we zapped all those tapes a couple years ago. Oh, yeah. So I kept looking for a tape of that game, seeing if anybody had an old, VHS of it or something like that. And so that always stayed in my mind because I was at that game that night where 16,000 were at the sold-out Assembly Hall, and, Thornridge went on a 43-9 run in the first half and just destroyed Quincy, which had scored 107 in its semifinal game earlier in the day. Thornridge was the best team I've ever seen. And so I kept thinking somebody ought to write a book about that. Well,
you did.
I was sitting at a Blazer game, and Quinn Buckner, who does color commentary for the Indiana Pacers, he's a vice president on the team. Mm-hmm. He's sitting there having dinner, and I said, hey, Quinn, I don't know, you wouldn't remember this, but I'm Scott Betzelberger. I was the captain of the team that was ranked second behind you guys most of your senior year. I said, now, and I'm sitting there, I'm 6'6". I gained a little weight. I was up to probably 250 instead of 100 and whatever. And but I'm sitting there talking with him. I said, now, we had kind of looked to you, and I would have guarded you if we played. And I said, you'd have probably kicked my butt. And he says, well, no, man, it looks to me like you could have played back in the day. And I said, well, I was 6'6" back then, and I was a guard, but you know what? I was only about 165 pounds. He goes, oh, yeah, I'd have kicked your butt. And I've cleaned that up a little bit, too.
Yeah, I understand. That was a given, I think. The clock's about to kill us here this morning. Scott, before Jim's going to grab a couple extra seconds. In the course of your seeking interviews, personalities being what they may be with all of us, did you ever receive any real brush-offs?
There were some that just said, no, I don't want to take part for whatever reason, and that's okay. That was totally up to them. The one that really kind of disappointed me the most was LeBron James. I looked him right in the eye and asked him, and he said, oh, yeah, that sounds like a cool project. And he called one of his representatives over and said, hey, set up a time to talk with Scott about this. I will do this. Set up a time. And I chased him with messages almost weekly for over a year, and finally was told, yeah, he's not going to do that.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest disappointment I think I had.
Well, having you on WLCN this morning has not been a big disappointment. We are very appreciative of your time. We'd like to sell some books for you. Scott Lynn has written this book, Sports Idol's Idol. Are there any at the local bookstore? Do you know that we have any inventory, Scott, by chance?
You know, it's a print-on-demand book. I self-publish and am self-marketing. I just don't want to, I don't want to pay somebody to do it because it was just kind of a labor of love more than a kind of a project just to fill the time. It is available. I mean, you can order it through any of the local bookstores, but it won't be on the shelves.
I see.
I didn't talk to anybody there about trying to do that. But
well, being a lifelong local
I'll bring some.
And being close to your family down through the years, for goodness sakes, we're just tickled to death to see your success, and we do appreciate your time. We appreciate your talent too, young fella. We always try to close Viewpoint with a quotation that's somewhat analogous to the subject of the day, and I came up with a quotation by Michael Jordan, which I think really applies to life and not only to sports. Michael said, I can't accept failures. Everyone fails sometimes. I can't accept not trying. And certainly, we'll close with that. Scott Betzelberger, never, ever quit trying. Thank you very much, Scott Lynn.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.